I have watched my brother Edmund make many decisions in his life, some brilliant, some costly, most of them delivered in the same unhurried tone he used whether he was managing an estate of 4,000 acres or declining a second cup of tea. He was the kind of man who moved through rooms without raising a sound, who spoke only when he had thought something through to its conclusion, and who, when he had concluded it, never revised. People called him cold. They called him proud. They called him several things I will not repeat in polite company. I called him Edmund, which was enough, and I called him occasionally a fool, which he was, in precisely one respect. Her name was Verity Ashton. I am going to tell you what happened between them in the autumn of 1887 because I was there for most of it, and because Edmund will never tell it himself, not out of shame, but because he is Edmund and Edmund does not narrate. He acts eventually, when the thing has gone on long enough that even he cannot justify the silence. It went on nearly 4 years before he acted. I want to be precise about that. 4 years, of which 3 were spent in circumstances beyond his control, and 1 was spent in a stubbornness so thorough it became almost architectural. He had built walls out of it. I watched him do it, and I watched those walls come down, and I will tell you the whole of it because someone ought to. Begin at the beginning, which is the autumn of 1883. Verity Ashton was not the sort of woman you noticed immediately. I mean that as a high compliment, though I understand it does not sound like one. The women you noticed immediately at the kind of dinner parties Edmund attended, the ones thrown by Lady Westhorpe and her circle, all candlelight and competition, were the ones dressed for being noticed, which is to say they were performing. Verity did not perform. She sat at a corner of the table and listened very carefully and occasionally said something that made the person beside her stop mid-sentence and reconsider whatever they had just been saying. She was the second daughter of a Derbyshire rector, widowed at 23 after a brief, and by all accounts, gentle marriage to a naval officer who did not survive the winter of 1881. She wore gray. She had a quality of stillness that some people read as coldness and I read as attention. The stillness of a woman who had decided that the world was worth observing closely, and who did not want to miss any of it by filling it with her own noise. Edmund noticed her at the 3rd dinner. I was there. I know the moment. She had just quietly corrected a colonel's account of a battle he claimed to have witnessed, citing a discrepancy in the reported positions of 2 regiments that she had read about in a letter from her late husband. She did not do it to humiliate him. She did it the way you correct someone's arithmetic, plainly, without malice, because the wrong answer is the wrong answer. The colonel reddened. The table went briefly quiet, and Edmund, who had been conducting a parallel and apparently exhausting conversation about drainage rights with a baron to his left, turned his head and looked at her. He looked at her for rather a long time. I said nothing. Edmund's personal life was not something he discussed with me any more than he discussed it with anyone, and to have remarked on it would have sent him back behind the walls immediately. I simply noted it, the way you note the first sign of weather, a change in pressure, a shift in the quality of the light, and waited to see what came of it. What came of it was 3 months of my brother finding reasons to attend events he would previously have declined, and Verity Ashton finding reasons, I think, to attend the same ones. I do not know what passed between them in private. I know that by December of 1883 Edmund was different in a way I could not precisely name. Not warmer exactly, because Edmund's warmth was never on the surface, but more present. He was paying attention. He had the look of a man who has remembered why he bothered getting up in the mornings. And then in January of 1884, he was sent to the continent. I will not go into the full details of what happened there, because most of it was diplomatic and dull, and the part that was not diplomatic was not dull at all, and not all of it is mine to tell. What I will say is this. Edmund Carew, Duke of Velthorpe, left England in January of 1884 on a mission that was supposed to last 6 weeks. He did not return to England until October of 1886. For a portion of that time, 7 months, The worst 7, he was not reachable by post, not because he had abandoned the correspondence, but because his correspondence was not reaching its destination, and because the circumstances of where he was and what had happened to him were not circumstances the Foreign Office chose to publicize. During those 7 months, England believed he was dead. I knew he was not. I was kept partially informed, in the muffled way that younger brothers of important men are kept informed. Enough to know he was alive, not enough to know when he would return. I was told not to discuss it. I did not discuss it. But I knew, in the private accounting of it that I kept in my own head, that Verity Ashton did not know. She had been told what the rest of England had been told, which was that the Duke of Velthorpe's situation abroad had become unclear, which was the Foreign Office's way of saying that a man had gone out of reach, and they were not certain in which direction. She wore black. I saw her once at a cousin's luncheon in the spring of 1885, and she wore black as though she had become accustomed to it, which perhaps she had. She had worn it for her husband not 3 years before. She looked composed. She looked very carefully composed, which is different. I wanted to tell her. I could not tell her. I sat across a table from her and ate cold salmon, and discussed nothing of importance, and watched her be very carefully composed. And it cost me a great deal. Edmund came home in October of 1886. He came home thinner than he had left, with a new scar along his jaw that he did not explain, and a quietness that was different from his usual quietness, denser, less certain of itself. He spent 6 weeks at Velthorpe, the Northumberland estate, before he came to London, and when he came to London he came to my rooms first, which was unusual enough that I poured him a drink before he had taken off his coat. "I need to know about Verity Ashton," he said. I told him what I knew. She had not returned to Derbyshire. She was living in London, rented rooms in Marylebone, writing correspondence on behalf of a charitable society for naval widows. She had not remarried. She was, as far as I knew, well. Edmund was quiet for a long time. "She will have heard things," he said eventually, about what happened." "Some of it," I said. "The version the Foreign Office permitted." "Which version?" "That you were detained, that it was a diplomatic difficulty, that you are returned and well." "Detained." He said the word the way you'd lift something out of a drawer to examine it. That is the word they used. "Yes." He was quiet again. He turned his glass in his hands. Outside my window, Piccadilly was conducting itself at full volume, entirely indifferent to whatever was happening inside the room, and after a while Edmund looked up and said, in the same tone he used for everything, "I wrote to her. Every week for the first 4 months. After that it was not. There was a period where writing was not possible. I don't know whether the letters arrived." I told him I did not know either. He nodded. He finished his drink and stood and put on his coat, and at the door he paused with his back to me and said, "I would like to see her." "Then see her," I said. "It has been nearly 3 years." "Edmund," I waited until he turned around. "It has been nearly 3 years. That is precisely why you should see her now, rather than leaving it another month while you decide how to phrase it." He looked at me with the particular expression he reserved for moments when he agreed with me and resented agreeing with me. Then he left. He did not see her that week. He did not see her the week after. He wrote one letter which I know because he mentioned it in passing, and I do not know whether she replied. What I know is that 6 weeks passed, and then he did something that surprised me. He went back to Velthorpe. In December, in the north of England, in the grey cold of a Northumberland winter. I went up to see him in the 2nd week of December, because I was worried about him, and because if I left Edmund to himself in that house in that state for much longer he would turn into the furniture. I arrived on a Thursday afternoon to find the estate in its usual condition, enormous, impeccably maintained, and almost entirely empty of people, and Edmund in the library at his desk, with a letter in front of him that he was either reading or staring at. I could not tell which. Is that from her? I asked. Sit down, Oliver. I sat. Is it from her? He looked up. She is leaving England. I said, what? In the new year. January, she said. There is an aunt in Edinburgh. She has taken a position with a charitable house there. She says the London work has run its course. He set the letter down very carefully on the desk. She is going to Edinburgh. I looked at my brother. I had not seen Edmund look like that since we were children, which is to say, uncertain. Edmund was not an uncertain man. Uncertainty had no natural habitat in him. It was a visitor, unwelcome, quickly shown the door. And yet there it was on his face, plainly, the look of a man confronting something he had not accounted for. Edmund, I said, why haven't you gone to her? I told you I wrote. You wrote a letter. That is not the same thing. It contains the same words. Does it contain your face? Does it contain Edmund? Look at me. He did. Does she know? Does she know all of it, not the Foreign Office version, all of it? Why you couldn't write? Why you couldn't come back sooner? He said nothing, which was its own answer. Then she doesn't know, I said. She has been sitting in Marylebone for 3 years thinking. God only knows what she's been thinking, Edmund. That you forgot. That you chose not to return to her. That whatever there was between you simply dissolved from your side while she was wearing black. Edmund picked up the letter again. He turned it over in his hands as though he was looking for a door in it. It is not a simple thing to explain. No, but it is a necessary one. He did not answer. She is leaving in January, I said. It is the 14th of December. He put the letter down. Edmund, I said. Tell her. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, I had thought to let her go. I felt that land. I sat with it for a moment because Edmund had not said many things in his life that surprised me, and this one surprised me very much. Why? I said. Because it has been 3 years, he said. Because she has remade her life without me by necessity, I grant you, but she has done it. She has her work and her independence and her plans. To arrive now and say, to make demands on a person who has already had to learn to do without you, he stopped. He looked at the letter. It seemed a cruelty. To reappear after 3 years and ask her to rearrange herself on my account. I sat with that too. I will say this for my brother. His reasoning was not careless. He had thought about this. He had thought about it in the way Edmund thought about everything, which was thoroughly and from every angle, and he had arrived at a conclusion that was generous and completely wrong. Edmund, I said when I had worked out how to say it, that reasoning would hold if Verity Ashton wanted to go to Edinburgh. Does she want to? He was quiet. She is going to Edinburgh, I said, because the Duke of Velthorpe came home from 3 years abroad and sent her a letter. A letter. After which, what did he do? He came back to Northumberland. In December. And from what you are telling me, he had decided to let her go and not tell her why he couldn't come home, and not tell her what those 3 years were, and simply, I stopped. Tell me I'm wrong. He did not tell me I was wrong. I stood up from my chair. Go and get your coat, I said. He looked up at me. It is 4:30 in the afternoon. Yes, and if we drive to the village we can catch the post road south, and in London by Friday evening. Get your coat, Edmund. He looked at me for a long moment, then he got his coat. We arrived in London on the evening of Friday the 16th. I had sent a telegram ahead from the last posting stop, not to Verity, because that was not my place to do, but to a mutual acquaintance who could establish discreetly that she was still in Marylebone and not yet in Edinburgh. She was. She had a fortnight left before her departure. Edmund took rooms in Mayfair. I stayed at my usual lodgings. On Saturday morning, I went to his rooms and found him dressed and sitting in the armchair by the window with his hat in his hands, which was not a thing Edmund Carew normally did. Edmund Carew normally had his hat on his head or on a hook. Having it in his hands meant he was thinking so hard he had forgotten where his hands were. Are you going? I said. I am deciding how to begin. Edmund, I sat down across from him. There is no correct way to begin this. There is only going and then speaking and then whatever comes of it. I am aware of that, he said. I am also aware that I have given her a great deal to be angry about, whether or not it was my doing, and that arriving at her door without warning and expecting. Edmund, I waited until he met my eyes. She has been careful and composed and quietly grieving for 3 years. The least you can do is knock on the door. He turned his hat over in his hands once more. Then he put it on his head. She was living in a narrow terrace in Marylebone, the second floor of a building that was clean and well kept and unambitious, the sort of address that says, "I am a capable person who does not require much." I did not go in. I waited on the pavement on the other side of the road because I had delivered my brother to the step and the rest of it was not mine to witness. I watched him knock. I watched the door open. I could not see the expression on the face of whoever answered, a landlady, I imagined. And then Edmund was inside, and the door closed, and I stood on the pavement in the cold December air and waited. He was inside for 45 minutes. He came out looking the way a man looks when a conversation has gone in a direction he did not anticipate, not badly, or not entirely badly, but sideways, into territory that had required different words than the prepared ones. He came across the road and stood beside me and said, "She will see me. Tomorrow. She requires time to think." That seems fair. Yes, he said. He was looking at nothing in particular across the road. She was very composed. She usually is. She has been corresponding with a woman in Edinburgh about a position running the household accounts of a charitable institution. She has been preparing for this for 2 months. He paused. She showed me the letter, from the Edinburgh woman. She showed it to me, Oliver. I waited. I don't know whether she was showing me that she had moved on and did not require my return, or whether she was showing me that she had moved on because she believed I was not returning. He looked at me. I could not tell. Then go back tomorrow and find out, I said. He went back on Sunday. I did not wait outside this time. I had done what I could do. The rest was between the two of them. I went to my club, read the papers without taking in a word of them, had lunch, and at 4 o'clock walked back to Edmund's rooms in Mayfair, where I found him already returned, standing at the window with a glass of whiskey he had not drunk. "How did it go?" I said. "She is still leaving," he said. I sat down. She was entirely kind," he said. "She said that she was glad I had called, that she was glad I was well. She said—" He stopped. He turned from the window. In the gray afternoon light he looked older than I had seen him look and more honest. Edmund was always honest, but in a compressed way. He said true things and left the rest in silence. He looked now as though some of the silence had become unsustainable. She said she had written to me. After the Foreign Office announced I was uncertain. She had written, and there was no reply, and she had concluded— He stopped again. She had concluded that the absence of a reply was itself a reply. I felt the weight of that. "Edmund, did you explain to her everything, what the 7 months were?" He was quiet for a moment. "I told her some of it." "Some?" "I told her I had been held, that I could not write, that when I could write again I did, and that I do not know whether those letters reached her." He turned back to the window. She listened. She was very careful. She said she did not doubt that the circumstances were complicated. She said she understood that I had been in an impossible position. He put the glass down on the sill without drinking from it. And then she said, "But you came back to England in October of 1886. It is now December of 1887. You have had 14 months. I said nothing. 14 months, he said again. And a letter, that is what I sent her. 1 letter in 14 months, and then silence, and then her door. He said it without bitterness, just with the plain accounting of it, the way you'd read out a column of figures that had not come out in your favor. She was right. She was entirely right. The 7 months were not my fault. The 14 were. Edmund. No, he said, and his voice was not sharp, only firm, the way it got when he had finished with a thing. She is correct. I spent 14 months deciding, reasoning, telling myself it was better to let her be. Meanwhile, she was in Marylebone in rented rooms, working for a charity she hadn't chosen, and when I finally appeared at her door, she was 3 weeks from Edinburgh. He picked up the glass and set it down again. I wasted 14 months, Oliver, on reasoning. I sat with him in the room for a while without saying anything, because there was nothing that wanted saying. After a long time he said, I need to tell her all of it. Yes, I said, you do. Not the compressed version, not some of it. He turned around. Everything, including the part I haven't told anyone. The part that would explain why 14 months felt, to me, like the wrong time, when in fact there is no wrong time. There is only the time that passes while you are waiting for the correct one. I did not know exactly what part he meant. I guessed. About what you thought when you were. When I thought I wasn't coming back, he said, yes, that part. He looked at me steadily. Will you come with me tomorrow? You want me there? I want her to know it is not I want a witness, he said. Not for my sake, for hers, so that there is someone who can confirm afterward that I said the things I said. He paused. If she will allow it. I will come, I said. She allowed it. She met us in the small sitting room on the second floor of the Marylebone Terrace, a room with 2 good windows, a plain rug, a writing desk in the corner with a stack of correspondence that told you how her mornings were spent. She was dressed in dove gray, which was not the black of 2 years ago, but was also not fully herself yet, I thought, though I was aware I might be reading more into her clothes than they contained. She had made tea. She had done this, I would come to understand, not out of domesticity but out of habit. Her hands liked to have a task. She looked at Edmund when we came in. She looked at him in the way you look at something you have been trying to see clearly and have not quite managed. He looked back at her. I sat in the chair nearest the door and made myself as unobtrusive as a large man in a small sitting room can manage, and I attended. Edmund sat across from her, hat in his hands again, and then he put it down on the table and said, I want to tell you what happened, all of it, not the Foreign Office version, the truth of it, if you will hear it. She looked at him. I will hear it, she said. He told her. He told her about the January of 1884, the crossing, the initial meetings, the way the mission had complicated itself within the first 3 weeks into something that could not be walked away from without consequence. He told her about the letters he had sent in the early months, 1 a week, which was true. I confirmed it later when she looked at me, and I said yes, that was true. He told her about the evening in August when the situation had broken in the direction that had not been anticipated, and about the 7 months that followed, not in detail, because some of it was still sworn, but in outline. A small town in the interior of a country he could not name, a diplomatic holding that was neither imprisonment nor freedom, a period in which no correspondence moved and no correspondence was received. He told her that in that period, in the silence of it, he had thought about her with a frequency that had become almost structural, that she had been, for those 7 months, one of the few things he held onto when the holding was difficult. He said this last part quickly, and without embellishment, and without looking away from her. She had gone very still. She was holding her cup of tea in both hands, and she had not drunk from it, and her face had the expression of a person doing very careful arithmetic. He kept going. When I came home, he said, I was not what I had been. Not in ways that were visible, perhaps, but in ways that had to do with certainty. I had spent 7 months in a situation over which I had no control. When I came home, I found that I had become reluctant, I think, to move toward anything that might be refused, not from pride, from I don't know a better word for it than cowardice. He said the word evenly. I reasoned very thoroughly that to go to you and tell you what you had meant to me, when you had been given every reason to build a life without me, was to impose, was to ask you to give up something real, your independence, your plans, for something uncertain. For me. And I had decided, because I was very thorough about my reasoning, that the kind thing was to let you go. He paused. What I had not allowed for, he said, was that you were also deciding, that while I was being kind about it from a distance, you were taking the silence as its own message, and arriving at Edinburgh. He looked at her very directly. I did not come here to stop you going to Edinburgh, Verity. I came because it was wrong of me not to tell you the truth, and I have been wrong about it for 14 months, and you deserve to know what actually happened, and what the 14 months were, and what you. He stopped. This was unusual. Edmund did not usually stop in the middle of a sentence. He started again. You are the woman, he said very quietly, that I thought about for 7 months in a room I could not leave, every week of it. I thought about the dinner in November, the one where you corrected the colonel. I thought about the walk we took in Kensington in December. I thought about what you said about grief at the Westhorpe dinner, the second one, when you said that grief was not sadness exactly, but the habit of expecting someone and the small shock, repeated, of their absence. He paused again. I was writing to you every week because you were the person I most wanted to tell what was happening to me. And when I couldn't write to you anymore, I thought that was still true. I thought, if I can come home, I will tell her. The room was very quiet. Verity put her teacup down. She did not make a sound doing it. She looked at Edmund, and then she looked down at her hands for a moment, and then she looked up again. You wrote to me, she said, every week. Yes. From January to August. Yes. I received 3 letters, she said. The first 3 in February. Edmund absorbed this. After that, she said, there was nothing, and then there was the Foreign Office notice, and then there was nothing again. She was quiet for a moment. I wrote to you in March. I wrote again in May. I wrote again when the Foreign Office announcement was made, because whatever I believed, I felt that I wanted you to know. She stopped. She straightened. I want you to understand that I did not give up on you quickly, Edmund. I did not give up on you because I wanted to. He said, I know. Do you? She looked at him. Because you came to my door in November and you sent a letter, and then you went to Northumberland for a month, and I thought. She stopped again. She pressed her lips together. When she spoke again, her voice was very even, the way it got when she was being very careful. I thought that you had reconsidered, that you had come to my door and seen that I had managed and had decided that I was managing well enough. That you were, she paused, that you were releasing me from any expectation. No, Edmund said. The word came out faster than his words usually came. No, I was not releasing you from anything. I was reasoning badly. He looked at her. I am sorry, Verity. I am sorry for the 14 months. The 7 that went before, I could not help those. The 14, those were mine. She looked at him for a long time. In the gray December light, her face was very clear, and there was nothing performed about it, just a woman sitting with the truth of something and deciding what to do with it. I did not move. I am not sure I breathed. What is it you want? She said at last, not hostile, not cold, simply asking. Edmund said, I would like not to let you go to Edinburgh if you will allow it. I would like the chance to stop reasoning and simply be in the same room as you, on a regular basis. For as long as you will permit it, with whatever comes of that as its own conclusion. Verity looked at him. That is a very careful way of putting it, she said. I am a careful man, he said. That is perhaps the problem. Something shifted in her face. It was very small, a slight release around the eyes, as though she had been holding something and had set it down. You thought about the walk in Kensington, she said. Yes. I walked that same circuit every Sunday for a year, she said, after the Foreign Office notice. She paused, for no reason I could have explained. Edmund looked at her. I have made the Edinburgh arrangements, she said. I have committed to a position. I cannot simply, she stopped. There are letters I would need to write. I understand, he said. It would take a week to manage it at least, the correspondence. I understand. She looked at him for one more long moment. Then she picked up her teacup and she drank from it and she set it down again. You may call on Thursday, she said, if you are still in London. Edmund said, I will be in London on Thursday. I will not recount every detail of the weeks that followed, partly because they are not all mine to tell, and partly because the story of two careful people deciding to trust each other again moves in increments that are invisible from the outside and immeasurable from within. What I can tell you is this. Edmund called on Thursday, and the week after, and the week after that, and in January there were no letters sent to Edinburgh. In February he took her to hear a concert at the Hanover Square Rooms, and I happened to be in the same building that evening. Genuinely happened, I should say, though Edmund never entirely believed it, and saw them walking out together afterward into the cold air, and the expression on his face was one I had last seen on him when we were boys. When he had found a pair of nesting hawks in the old elm on the Velthorpe grounds, and had stood looking at them for an hour because he did not want to walk away. She brought him into speech, which was the remarkable thing. Edmund talked with Verity in a way he did not talk with anyone else, not at length, not volubly, not the way some men talk who want to fill space, but he told her things. He said what he meant. When they disagreed, and they did disagree, about several things, including at one memorable dinner whether her reading of a particular parliamentary history was more accurate than his, which it was, and he admitted it. He said plainly what he thought, and then listened plainly to her answer. There was a respect in it, and more than respect. There was the particular quality of a man in the presence of someone he is certain of. I do not know when she became certain of him. I could not see it from the outside. But by March there was something in the way she sat in a room with him, not relaxed exactly, because Verity Ashton was a composed person and composure was not the same as ease but settled. The quality of settled. As though the arithmetic had finally come out right, and she had put the pencil down. He asked her in April. I know because he told me the morning before, and asked me whether I thought it was too soon, and I told him that 3.5 years of one kind or another felt sufficient, and he looked at me with the expression that meant he agreed and resented agreeing, and then he went. She said yes. This I know because he came to my rooms that evening and did not say a word for the first 5 minutes, and then said, she said yes, in the tone of a man who has been told something remarkable and is still in the process of adjusting to it. Edmund, I said, I'm glad. He looked at me. I thought, he stopped. I thought about it in the wrong way, all of it. For 14 months I thought about what she would lose by having me return. I hadn't let myself think about what she might want. No, I said. She told me, he said, this afternoon. She told me what the Sundays were like, the year of Sundays walking the Kensington circuit. He was quiet for a moment. I had been so occupied with not imposing on her that I had failed entirely to consider that she might have been doing the same thing, deciding not to impose on me. He paused. We were both being very careful in the same direction. That is one way to put it, I said. He looked at me, and I saw the wry shape of something that was not quite a smile, on a face that had not had much use for them in the past several years. You have an alternative phrasing, he said. I would call it a great deal of effort spent on the wrong problem, I said. He was quiet. Yes, he said, that is also accurate. They were married in June in a small stone church on the coast of Northumberland, 3 miles from Velthorpe. It was a Tuesday, which was Verity's preference. She said Saturdays were for events requiring an audience, and this was not that kind of event. There were 12 people present, which included the vicar, my wife Cecily, who wept throughout in a way that I found very affecting, and she found entirely reasonable, and a quiet elderly woman who turned out to be Verity's aunt from Derbyshire, the rector's sister, who stood in the front pew and watched the proceedings with an expression of severe satisfaction, as though she had predicted this particular outcome and had been waiting some years to be proven right. Edmund stood at the front of the church with his back to the door, and I watched him turn when she came in, that slow, controlled turn of a man who is not going to rush anything, not even this, and watched his face when he saw her. It was the most undisguised thing I had ever seen him do, that turning, that looking. His whole face did something I do not have precise words for. It was the look of a man who has spent a great deal of time being very careful, and has arrived at the moment when care is no longer the point. She came up the aisle in a dress the color of winter light, not white, because she was a widow, and Verity had never done anything for appearances that did not also feel true, and she looked at him the whole way down, not nervous, certain, with the quality of settled which I had seen on her in March and which had deepened into something more. I gave the ring. I had not expected to feel anything in particular, but I felt something when Edmund took it and turned to her, something to do with the length of it, the length of the road to this room, the 7 months and the 14 months and the Sunday walks around Kensington and the letter that contained 30 pages and the door she had almost not opened, and the thing they had both been careful about in the wrong direction until they had stopped being careful, and simply said it plainly in a sitting room in Marylebone in December. He put the ring on her hand. She looked up at him, and she said something quietly just for him, not for the room, and he said something back, and I did not hear either of them, and I was glad. Some things are not for the witnesses. Some things are the door closing, the room belonging only to the two people in it, the long argument settled at last in the simplest possible terms. Edmund is not a man who talks about his own life. I said that at the beginning, and I will say it again at the end, because it is the truth, and because I want you to understand what it means that he told me what he told me on the evening after the wedding, when we were sitting in the library at Velthorpe, the library where I had found him in December with the letter he was reading or staring at, with the fire going and the sound of Verity and Cecily somewhere else in the house, talking. He said, I spent 7 months in a room thinking about what I wanted to say to her if I came home. And then I came home and said almost none of it. You said it in April, I pointed out. I said some of it in April. In the Edinburgh letter I said more of it because a letter there is a useful distance in a letter. He looked at the fire. She showed it to me this evening. She has kept it. The Edinburgh letter, I said. All of them, he said. The 3 that arrived from the early months, she kept those too. He paused. I didn't know that. I sat with that for a moment. The fire made its small sounds. Somewhere in the house, Cecily laughed at something and a door opened and closed. Edmund, I said, you know now. He looked at me. And then he did the thing I had not seen him do since we were very young. He looked, for just a moment, purely glad, not relieved, not satisfied, glad in the simple, uncomplicated way that lives below all the reasoning. Yes, he said, I know now. He would tell you, if you asked him, that the story is not interesting. He would tell you it is a story about 2 careful people who spent an unreasonable amount of time being careful at each other, until one December evening in a sitting room in Marylebone, one of them. He would say it was him, though I suspect she would tell it differently, stopped being careful and said the plain thing. He is right that it is not a complicated story. He is wrong that it is not interesting. What I watched, across 4 years and 2 continents and a great many silences that should have been conversations, was this. A man who had learned very young that the surest protection against being wrong was to be thorough, meeting a woman who had learned, through a grief she had not chosen, that the surest protection against more grief was to be composed. And the 2 of them, each being very careful in the way the other could not quite see, spending years arriving at the same knowledge by different roads, that the other one was worth the risk of not being careful. That is the whole of it. That is what I saw. On the Tuesday they were married, when the vicar had finished and the small congregation was making its quiet way out into the June afternoon, I walked behind Edmund and Verity down the aisle of the stone church, and I watched my brother put his hand over hers where it rested on his arm, a small gesture, unhurried, entirely private, and I thought, well, there it is. He had thought about her for 7 months in a room he could not leave. He had been wrong about the 14 months that followed, and he had said so. He had knocked on the door. He had said the plain thing, eventually, in a sitting room in Marylebone, to a woman in dove gray who had been walking a circuit in Kensington every Sunday for a year. She had stayed. That seems to me, in the end, to be the important word. After everything, the 7 months and the 14, the letters that arrived and the ones that didn't, the Edinburgh plans and the December roads and the very careful reasoning in the wrong direction, she had stayed. Not because she was asked to, because she had decided to. Because Verity Ashton, who had been composure itself through losses that would have broken a less clear-eyed person, had sat in a sitting room in December and listened to a man tell the truth, and had decided that the truth was worth something. Which is, I would argue, the whole point. Edmund, if you ever read this, and you won't, because you don't read things written about you, you were right that it was not a complicated story. You were right that 2 careful people, eventually, simply said it. What you left out is that it was also the finest thing I have ever had the privilege of watching up close. She is reading in the next room. You are about to go and sit with her. Go.